The show You is one of Netflix's most recent shows to be released. It's a psychological thriller that keeps you glued to the screen, constantly wondering what is going to happen next. Following the stalker Joe, does he turn out to have good intentions, or is he actually as sick and twisted as you think he has the potential to be? And also, is the show any good? Let's find out. Before I go ahead, make sure you go over to my Twitter @brainpilot_ and tweet me what show or movie you'd like me to review next. So without further ado, I'm Brainpilot, and here is a review of You. Just to let you know, there will be spoilers, obviously. The story. The story in this Netflix original show is based off of the book by Caroline Kepnes. It follows the life of Joe, the bookstore owner, and his first encounter with Beck, and everything that soon follows after, including all of the acts that he's prepared to carry out for her. I feel like this kind of story is ordinarily quite far-fetched and can be quite boring, but the way that it's told in this show is executed perfectly, and you're never left bored once. Joe is madly in love with Beck, and he sets out on a mission by stalking her to become her lover and live the perfect life together. We are made aware of what he is thinking throughout the whole of the season. This is due to being able to hear inside of his head. This is narrated by Joe himself, as though he deliberately wants us to know how sick and twisted his mind is. This was a feature in the show that I really liked. We got to gauge a true understanding of the character and the real reasons behind why he was doing what he was doing. Many people find the inside of the mind of a serial killer interesting, and they want to know their motive. This show allowed us to. As the episode goes on, you start by thinking that Joe is slightly weird by stalking Beck. However, as the episode unravels, you start to see just how psychotic he is. By posing as a potential business partner, he traps Beck's so-called boyfriend and keeps him trapped under the bookstore. You see him conflicted about what to do, and he realizes how he's messed up. But ultimately, Joe killing Beck's ex-boyfriend, this was a turning point in the episode. It was a turning point because he actually killed someone. The show led you to believe that Joe wasn't a killer, and it also led you to believe that he was going to let Beck's boyfriend out. However, he didn't. And for me, this is where the whole show changed. For the better, that is. As Joe gets closer and closer to Beck, her best friend Peach is next on Joe's kill list. Peach was wary of Joe, and the more time went on, the more she tried to poison Beck's mind about Joe. Obviously, he wasn't a fan, and he tried killing her not once, but twice. He smashed her over the head with a rock in broad daylight, which is something I didn't think was that smart, and I felt like his character would have been a lot smarter than that. And also, he then shot her when they had a massive fight at the house that Peach was now hiding at. This ultimately, obviously, killed her. I wasn't a massive fan of the character Peach, but with this show, I feel like you really felt the deaths whenever they occurred. Maybe because the show felt very real, and it wasn't an idea that was too dissimilar to what could potentially occur in everyday life. Now, with all of his competition and people that are skeptical of him out the way, this of course then led Joe to live happily ever after with Beck. However, that wasn't the case. The relationship took a turn for the worst, and even though Joe was loving her unconditionally, she just started to fall out of love with him. I'm glad they included that and didn't just make it a happy ever after story. Because Beck has been through a lot, and obviously she would have some underlying issues. Beck ends up sleeping with her therapist, and Joe ends up going to see him to potentially kill him. But for the time being, he thinks that he hasn't slept with her, and ends up getting therapy from him too. This leads the pair to break up and go their separate ways. Beck lives the single life, and Joe lives a life with his new girlfriend. However, he is still constantly thinking about Beck, even though he has calmed down a bit. All until he bumps into her. This ultimately leads Joe to having an affair. Obviously that was going to happen, and then they end up back together. Bit predictable, but it's okay. Whilst the whole series is going on, you hear the story about the character Candice, who is somebody that Joe used to date, but there's this mystery about where she has gone and what actually happened to her. As an audience member, you've been led to believe that considering all that Joe has done in the show, he's most likely killed her. Whilst Beck and Joe are back together, Beck hears all about Candice and ends up doing her own sort of investigation. This is then when we find out about Joe killing the record producer that Candice slept with whilst they were together, and then also finding out that Candice's brother is dead. This is then when the ante gets lifted as Beck approaches Joe, And once he finds out, he shows photos of Candice to Beck in Italy on Instagram, which is surprising, because throughout the whole of the show, you've thought that she is actually dead. Although, one thing that Joe always did with his victims was use their social media for a bit to make it seem like they were still alive. Although Joe didn't seem like he was a killer that was extremely smart, or ever really knew what he was doing, he always somehow did. Or he let on to us that he did. A few days pass, and this is then when the climax of the season happens. Joe goes out to get some breakfast, and Beck goes to the bathroom and looks in the ceiling. This is after finding out from Pac that you can hide things in a certain panel. In the box, she found her underwear, her vest, Peach's phone, and her ex-boyfriend's teeth, along with many other things that imply that he has been stalking her and committing murders. This was a moment that was quite conflicting to watch. This is because you've gone on this journey with Joe, and although he's committed these crimes and is a weird stalker, you've grown to like him a little. As a character, he's interesting to watch, and you didn't really want to see the downfall of him. This led Beck to being captured by Joe after finding out that she knew, and she ended up where all of his victims did. In the box. She was kept there to right up until the point where she tried to escape, and that is where it all went wrong for her. She thought she'd knock Joe out with a mallet, which is something I thought was a bit stupid. I don't know how he got up after being battered round the head with a mallet. However, he did. And this is then when it cuts to upstairs and us finding out that Beck has become the writer that she so long desired. But unfortunately, she's dead. Joe took the words that she wrote whilst locked in the box, altered them slightly, and it became a bestseller. He committed all of these crimes for her, all for nothing, apart from the time that they had, which is something that he appreciated. In her work, Joe tampered it so that the therapist was blamed for those murders that were committed. I thought this ending was brilliant. It showed us just how Joe's mind works and that he's able to manipulate anything or anyone to make it go in his favour. You then see shots purposely like the beginning of the season as a new girl enters the shop, and it leads you to believe that Joe is going to do this all over again. He's going to find a new girl, fall in love, and stalk her. However, when Joe gets close enough to the girl, it turns out that it's actually Candice. And much to not only Joe's surprise, but to mine, she's alive. This is then when the season finishes, and it makes you think that they're going to carry on with the season 2. I thought the story in this show was absolutely fantastic. It took you on a journey with Joe, not only by witnessing it, but by being inside of his mind and understanding all of the conflicting emotions that he had when he was doing what he was doing. I loved the way that he loved Beck so much that he'd do anything for her, even kill her. It was well written, and I thought it was excellent at making you watch the next episode immediately after. It's a show with one of the best stories that I've seen in a long time. The characters. Joe. Joe was a character that I think has been designed for us to like, but in reality, we shouldn't. On the outside, he's a nice guy who looks out for his neighbours and is the only one who really cares for Paco. But on the other hand, he goes around committing all of these murders and stalking these girls. But the way he's been designed is to be a cool, good-looking, smooth-talking guy. I thought the portrayal of the character was perfect, and I don't think that I could fault the character in the slightest. He had a journey that was extremely exciting to be a part of. Beck. Beck was a character who started off okay, but then as the show went on, I found that she became increasingly more and more annoying. I'm uncertain as to why, but I found the episode where we were inside of her head something that I didn't really care for. It felt like Joe and herself were just as messed up as each other, but her ride wasn't as enjoyable. Peach. I thought that the character Peach was an interesting one. She was the concerned best friend that many people have, but at the same time, she was basically another Joe. We found out that she was just like Joe. She loved her, she'd stalked her, and had, I suppose, what you would call ammunition against her. Many times I found myself not really liking this character due to how in the way she got of Joe's motives. And even though I didn't necessarily want her to die in the show, and when she did, the journey for Joe was a whole lot smoother and more interesting to watch as a viewer, which I suppose is bad. Paco. Paco was the only thing that Joe seemed to care for in a way that seemed the most natural. As a viewer, it seemed as though he treated him like a younger brother, even killing somebody for him, without worrying about the consequences. Paco brought out the goodness in Joe and is really the only time we see him care in a way that isn't obsessive or for his own gain. You see as well when Joe shouts at him, he feels really guilty for doing so and apologizes. Paco was the person who kept Joe grounded for the small amount of time. Final thoughts. Overall, I would say that You is an extremely underrated series on Netflix, and I don't feel as though it's getting the exposure that it necessarily deserves. I believe that it is one of the best things to come out on the platform for a long while, and the intimate journey that you go on with Joe inside of his mind, and the way that he justifies what he does, allows us to have an insight into what it may be like inside an actual serial stalker and killer's mind. You feel conflicted at times between whether you should like him or not, but his Franco-like smile charms the hell out of everybody watching, and you get sucked into the trap that he sets on the viewer in not hating him. The way it was shot was beautiful. The look that the series had was unique, and there was always a tinge that ran throughout. Also, some of the transitions that were used fed into each other so smoothly. I would recommend watching this show 100%. It's been spoiled by watching this video, but go and appreciate it if anything. I'm looking forward to seeing what Season 2 will bring. If you want to say in what videos you see on this channel, then I've started doing polls on the community tab on my channel. The one that wins gets made. So go and vote and see the type of video that you would like to see. If you want to support the channel in a different way, then I've recently set up a Patreon. And by going over there, you can get your hands on some exclusive content that's only available on Patreon. Take a look and see what you think. What do you think of the show You? Are you looking forward to Season 2? Leave a comment down below. And don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.